She collapsed against the canyon wall. Blood soaked through her dress. Her daughter clutched her with trembling hands. Eliza Morgan looked up at the Spokane hunter with eyes that had already accepted death. "Leave me here, just save my child," she begged, her voice breaking on every word. Takwa crouched before them, his rifle still hot from the gunfight that had driven off the outlaws, and his answer came firm as the stone beneath their feet. "I won't let both of you die here." He didn't know that this moment, this choice in the dust and blood of the Arizona Badlands, would drag him into a war he never wanted, against men who showed no mercy, for a woman and child he'd only just met. But some promises once spoken cannot be taken back. The sun hammered down on the red rocks of the Arizona Territory like the anvil of an angry god. Takwa moved through the canyon with the silence his father had taught him, moccasins finding purchase on stone that would have sent a white man's boots skidding. His rifle rested easy across his forearms, a Winchester repeater he'd won in a card game from a cavalry sergeant who'd bet more than he could afford to lose. The weapon was fine, but Takwa trusted his bow more. Steel jammed. Sinew and Wood remembered he was tracking elk. 3 days out from the Spokane encampment near the Gila River, following sign that led deeper into the maze of red stone canyons the Apache called home but rarely traveled anymore. The army had driven most of them south into Mexico or onto the reservations. The land felt empty now, haunted by absence more than presence. Takwa had learned to move through that emptiness like smoke through cracks in stone. The first shot cracked across the canyon before he saw anything wrong. The sound echoed off the walls, multiplying, making it hard to pin down direction. Takwa dropped low instinctively, his body finding cover behind a tumble of boulders before his mind finished processing the threat. His father's voice spoke in his memory, carried on 20 years of lessons. "White men shoot first and call it courage. Wise men wait and call it survival." A woman's scream cut through the echo of gunfire. High and desperate, followed by a child's cry that made something twist hard in Takwa's chest. He moved toward the sound, using the canyon's natural contours for cover, his rifle up and ready. Around a bend in the stone corridor, the scene opened before him like a page torn from a book of suffering. 4 men on horseback circled a broken-down wagon. The wagon's team lay dead in their traces, shot through the head, their blood darkening the dust. One wheel had shattered against the rocks, leaving the whole rig canted at an angle that spoke of violent collision. Near the wagon's rear, a woman pressed herself against the canyon wall, a small girl clutched tight to her chest. The woman's dress was torn at the shoulder, and blood ran down her left arm from a wound Takwa couldn't quite see from his angle. The men were laughing. One of them, a heavy-set rider with a beard that hung to his chest, fired his pistol into the air. "Come on now, lady. We ain't asking for much. Just whatever you got in that wagon, and maybe a little conversation before we ride on." "Please," the woman's voice carried clear despite her fear. "Please, just take what you want and go. My daughter, she's only 6 years old. Please don't hurt her." "Well now, that depends on you being cooperative." This from a thin man with a scar cutting white through his sunburned face. He dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he stalked toward the woman. "We're reasonable men. You be reasonable back and everybody walks away happy." The woman tried to back up further, but the canyon wall stopped her. The little girl was crying now, her face buried against her mother's chest. The thin man reached out and the woman jerked away. His hand caught her hair instead, yanking her head back hard enough to make her gasp. Takwa's first shot took the thin man in the shoulder. The Winchester's crack was different from the pistol's, sharper, meaner. The man spun and went down screaming. The other 3 riders wheeled their horses, confusion and fury mixing on their faces as they tried to locate the shooter. Takwa had already moved, his body flowing along the canyon wall to a new position before the echo faded. Who the hell? The bearded man's pistol was up, swinging wild. He fired twice at nothing, the bullets whining off stone 20 feet from where Takwa crouched. The Spokane hunter sighted carefully and squeezed again. The bearded man's horse screamed and reared as the bullet passed close enough to burn its flank. The rider hit the ground hard, his pistol flying from his grip. The remaining two men made the smart choice. They spurred their horses and ran, not even looking back for their wounded companion. The thin man with the bullet in his shoulder staggered to his feet, clutching the wound with one hand, while the other scrabbled for the pistol at his belt. Takwa stepped into view then, his rifle trained center mass. Don't. One word, flat and final. The thin man's hand froze. His eyes found Takwa's face, and something ugly twisted in his expression. Injun should have known. You got no stake in this, Redskin. This is white folks' business. Your business is done here. Takwa moved closer, his rifle never wavering. You can ride out or you can bleed out. Choose fast. The bearded man had found his feet and was backing toward his horse. This ain't over, Savage. Hollis Crane, don't forget a face. You just bought yourself a world of trouble. Then I'm already rich with it. Takwa gestured with the rifle barrel. Go. They went. The thin man had to be helped onto his horse by the bearded one called Hollis Crane, and they rode out cursing and threatening. Takwa watched until they disappeared around the canyon's bend, then waited 5 more minutes to be sure they weren't circling back. Only when he was satisfied did he turn his attention to the woman and child. The woman had slid down the canyon wall until she sat in the dust, her daughter still clutched against her. Blood had soaked through the sleeve of her dress, spreading dark and wet across the fabric. Her face had gone pale, her breathing shallow. When Takwa approached, she looked up at him with eyes that held equal parts gratitude and terror. Are you hurt bad? He kept his voice gentle, the way he would with a wounded animal. He set his rifle against the canyon wall and raised his hands to show they were empty. I'm not going to harm you. Let me see the wound. You saved us. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Those men, they killed our horses. They were going to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Takwa had seen enough of what men like that did on the frontier. He knelt beside her, careful to move slowly. The little girl peeked out from her mother's chest, her eyes huge and frightened. She had hair the color of wheat and freckles across her nose. Couldn't have been more than 6, like her mother said. My name is Takwa. What's yours? Lily. The girl's voice was tiny. That's my mama. What's your mama's name? I'm Eliza. The woman shifted, trying to show him the wound. Eliza Morgan. We were heading to Fort Verde. My husband, he died 6 months ago, cholera. I was taking Lily to my sister's place. She married an army officer stationed there, but our wheel broke, and then those men. Her words came faster now, shock giving way to the need to explain, to make sense of what had happened. Takwa examined the wound. A bullet had carved a furrow across the outside of her upper arm, deep enough to bleed heavy, but it hadn't hit bone or the big vessels. She'd been lucky, if you could call any part of this lucky. He pulled his canteen and a piece of cloth from his pack. This will hurt, she nodded. He poured water over the wound, washing away blood and dirt. Eliza gasped, but didn't pull away. Lily watched with wide eyes as Takwa wrapped the cloth tight around her mother's arm, binding it firm to stop the bleeding. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He'd tended more than his share of wounds in his 32 years. Can you stand? He asked when he'd finished. Eliza tried. Got halfway up before her legs wobbled and gave out. Takwa caught her, one arm supporting her weight. She was lighter than he'd expected, worn thin by travel and grief. I'm sorry. I feel dizzy. Blood loss. He looked at the ruined wagon, at the dead horses, at the shattered wheel. You can't stay here. Those men might come back with friends. Fort Verde is 40 miles north. You won't make it on foot, not wounded. Then what do we do? Fear crept back into Eliza's voice. I can't. I don't have the strength. Lily tugged at her mother's skirt. Mama, are we going to die? The question hung in the hot air like smoke. Takwa looked at this woman and child, refugees from a world that kept grinding people down until nothing was left but dust and bones. He thought of his own mother, dead 10 years now from the white man's spotted sickness. He thought of his sister, married to a rancher and living in a wooden house, trying to forget she'd ever been Spokane. He thought of all the ways the world had of breaking people who didn't have the strength or luck to bend. No. He said it firm enough that Lily stopped crying. "No, you're not going to die. There's a place, 3 miles west, an old line shack. Hunters used it before the cattle ranchers claimed this range. It's still standing. We can hole up there, tend your wound proper, wait until you're strong enough to travel." "Why would you help us?" Eliza's eyes searched his face. "You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Takwa thought about that for a moment. He could tell her about duty, about the old ways his father taught him, about how his people believed everyone carried a responsibility to aid those in need. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any of that. Because those men back there, they saw you as something to be used and thrown away. "I see you as people who deserve better," he paused. "That reason enough?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Yes, thank you. I don't know how we'll ever repay you. Stay alive. That's payment enough." He looked at the wagon. "Is there anything in there you need? Food, water supplies?" There's a box under the driver's seat. It has our things. Papers, some money, Lily's doll." Eliza tried to stand again, but Takwa gestured for her to stay put. He approached the wagon carefully. The dead horses had begun to draw flies, and the smell of blood hung heavy in the still air. The box was where Eliza said it would be, a small wooden chest with brass hinges. He pulled it free and carried it back. Inside were the fragments of their life. Documents in careful script, a leather purse with maybe $30 in coins and bills, a carved wooden doll with yarn hair, and a daguerreotype in a tin frame showing a younger Eliza standing beside a tall man in a suit. "My husband." Eliza's voice was soft. "Thomas, he was a good man. Got sick helping at the cholera hospital in Tucson. By the time the fever took him, he'd saved maybe 20 people. The town buried him with full honors. But honors don't feed a child or keep a roof over her head." Takwa closed the box. "I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything." There was no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who'd run out of tears and was down to bare survival. "But you did more than be sorry. You did something." He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. Lily grabbed onto her mother's skirt with one hand and clutched her doll with the other. They made slow progress through the canyon, Takwa carrying his rifle in one hand and half carrying Eliza with the other. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Sweat ran down his back, soaking through his buckskin shirt. The line shack appeared after an hour of hard walking. It was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, built from rough-cut timber that had weathered to grey. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and the single window had lost its glass long ago. But the roof looked intact, and the walls would provide shade and shelter. That was enough. Inside, the air was blessedly cool. Takwa settled Eliza on the packed earth floor, her back against the wall. Lily sat beside her mother, not letting go of her hand. He checked the wound again. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. The cloth bandage was soaked through. He'd need to do better. His possibles bag held what he needed. Clean cloth, needles, thread, and a small tin of salve his aunt had made from pine resin and herbs. He built a small fire in the crude stone hearth, heating the needle until it glowed red. Eliza watched with growing understanding of what came next. "I have to close the wound. The bleeding won't stop otherwise." He met her eyes directly. "It's going to hurt worse than anything you've felt." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Do it. Lily, can you be brave for your mama?" Takwa asked the little girl. "Can you hold her hand and tell her it's going to be all right?" Lily nodded solemnly, her small fingers gripping her mother's hand tight. Takwa removed the bandage. The wound gaped ugly and red. He cleaned it again with water from his canteen, then threaded the cooled needle. The first stitch made Eliza gasp. The second made her whimper. By the third, tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't cry out. Lily held her hand and whispered, "It's going to be all right, Mama. It's going to be all right." 10 stitches closed the wound. Takwa worked as fast as he could without being careless. When he tied off the last thread, Eliza's face had gone grey, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. He applied the salve and wrapped the arm with clean cloth, then helped her lie down flat. "Rest now. Your body needs to heal. She was asleep within minutes, exhaustion claiming what pain couldn't. Lily curled up beside her mother, one small hand resting on Eliza's chest as if to reassure herself that it still rose and fell. Takwa sat by the door, his rifle across his knees, and watched the canyon entrance. The sun tracked across the sky. Shadows lengthened. His thoughts drifted to the men he'd driven off. Hollis Crane and his companions. Men like that didn't forgive or forget. They'd see his interference as an insult that demanded blood to answer. Takwa had made enemies today, the kind that came back with more guns and less mercy. But when he looked at Eliza and Lily sleeping in the dim light of the line shack, when he thought about what would have happened if he'd kept walking and minded his own business, he felt no regret. His father used to say that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he took from the world, but by what he gave when giving cost him something. Today had cost him his safety, his anonymity, his peaceful hunt. In return, he'd gained the lives of two strangers and the weight of a promise unspoken, but no less binding. He would see them safe to Fort Verde, whatever came after. Whatever price Hollis Crane tried to extract, Takwa would pay it. Because some debts were owed not to the people you saved, but to the man you wanted to be when you looked at yourself in still water. The sun set. Stars emerged like scattered embers against the darkening sky. Inside the line shack, Eliza stirred and murmured in fevered sleep. Lily's breathing came soft and even. And Takwa kept watch, his rifle ready, his eyes on the canyon mouth where danger would come when it came. Not if, but when. Dawn broke cold over the canyon, painting the red rocks in shades of amber and rust. Takwa had not slept. He'd kept watch through the night. His body settled into the stillness his father had taught him, where a man could rest without losing awareness of the world around him. Twice he'd heard coyotes calling in the distance. Once near midnight, the sound of horses moving along the canyon rim. Too far away to be certain, but close enough to tighten his grip on the Winchester. Inside the line shack, Eliza stirred as pale light crept through the window frame. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to memory and then to sharp awareness. She sat up too quickly and gasped, her hand going to the wounded arm. Lily woke beside her, blinking against the morning brightness. "How do you feel?" Takwa asked from his position by the door. "Like I've been shot." Eliza's attempt at humor came out strained. She examined the bandage, noting the clean white cloth and the careful binding. "You did this while I was asleep?" Last evening. 10 stitches. The wound was clean, no dirt or fabric caught inside. If infection doesn't set in, you'll heal well enough." He stood, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from the long night. "There's water in my canteen. Drink what you need. I'm going to scout the area, make sure those men didn't circle back during the night." Fear flashed across Eliza's face. "You think they came back?" "I think men like Hollis Crane don't leave a job half-finished. But I heard nothing close. Just want to be certain before we move." He checked his rifle, then pulled a knife from his belt and offered it to her handle first. "You know how to use this?" She took it with her good hand, testing the weight. "My father taught me. Said a woman on the frontier who couldn't defend herself was a woman waiting to become a victim." She met his eyes. "I've never had to use it on a person. Hope you don't have to start today. But if someone comes through that door who isn't me, you put that blade in them and don't hesitate. Hesitation is what gets you killed." His words were blunt, but Eliza nodded with grim understanding. Takwa slipped out into the morning. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and dust. He moved along the canyon wall, reading the ground the way white men read newspapers. His own tracks from yesterday were clear, as were the scuff marks where he'd half-carried Eliza. But there, crossing their trail at an angle, fresh hoofprints cut through the dust. 4 horses moving slow and deliberate. They'd come within 100 yards of the line shack before turning east toward the canyon mouth. His jaw tightened. They'd been hunted during the night, tracked like animals. The only question was whether Hollis Crane and his men had given up or were simply waiting for a better opportunity. Takwa followed the tracks for a quarter mile, noting where they'd stopped, where someone had dismounted to study the ground more carefully. A tracker then, someone who knew what to look for. That made things worse. He found the spot where they'd made cold camp, no fire to give away their position. Cigarette butts lay scattered in the dust, and the ground showed where 4 men had bedded down for a few hours. Bootprints and a patch of darker earth that might have been blood from the thin man's shoulder wound. They'd left at first light, riding north along the canyon rather than south, toward whatever town they'd come from. North, the same direction Fort Verde lay. They weren't running. They were positioning themselves between Takwa and safety. He returned to the line shack to find Eliza standing at the window, the knife still in her hand. She'd managed to get Lily to eat something from the supplies in Takwa's pack, dried meat and hardtack that the girl chewed with determined effort. When Takwa entered, both turned to face him with matching expressions of worry. They were here. He didn't see any point in softening it. 4 riders, same as yesterday. Tracked us to within 100 yards but didn't attack. They're camped north of here now, between us and Fort Verde. Why didn't they attack while we slept? Eliza's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes, because they're smart enough to know I'd hear them coming in the dark. Canyon walls throw sound strange at night. They'd have to come through that door one at a time, and I'd kill at least 2 before they got close. He set his rifle down and crouched to check his ammunition. But now they know where we are. They know you're hurt. They're thinking if they wait us out, hunger and thirst will do their work for them. How much water do you have? Enough for 2 days if we're careful. 3 if we're desperate. He looked up at her. But your wound needs tending. Another day in this heat without proper care, and infection will set in. We can't wait them out. Lily tugged at her mother's skirt. Mama, I'm scared. Eliza knelt, wincing at the movement, and pulled her daughter close. I know, sweet girl, but Takwa is going to keep us safe. Aren't you? She directed the question at him with an intensity that demanded honesty, not comfort. I'm going to try. He wouldn't lie to a child about danger. His father had never lied to him, and Takwa had survived into adulthood with a clear understanding of how the world worked. But I need you both to be brave. Can you do that, Lily? The girl nodded against her mother's chest, her small fingers clutching the wooden doll. Takwa moved to the window and studied the canyon. The walls rose steep on either side, red stone banded with white and black. Centuries of water had carved deep grooves and natural shelves into the rock. A man who knew how to climb could use those features to move above the canyon floor, out of sight from anyone watching the trail. It was risky, especially with a wounded woman and a child, but staying here was guaranteed death. We're going up. He pointed to the canyon wall. There's a trail, not much more than a deer path, but it leads to the rim. From there we can circle around, come at Fort Verde from the east instead of the north. It'll add a day to the journey, but it gets us away from Crane and his men. I can't climb. Eliza gestured at her wounded arm. I can barely stand without getting dizzy. Then I'll help you. We don't have another choice. He began gathering his gear, rolling everything into a tight pack. We leave within the hour. The sun gets much higher, and that climb will kill you faster than any bullet. They prepared in tense silence. Takwa fashioned a sling for Eliza's arm from a strip of his blanket, binding it tight against her chest to prevent movement. He packed what little food and water they had, distributed the weight carefully. Lily's wooden doll went into the top of the pack where she could see it, a small comfort in the midst of fear. Before they left, Takwa did something that made Eliza frown with confusion. He built up the fire in the hearth, feeding it until smoke rose thick from the chimney hole. Then he arranged their remaining supplies near the door, making it look like they were still using the shack. Won't that tell them we're here? Eliza asked. It'll tell them someone's here. When they come to investigate, we'll be long gone up the wall. By the time they figure out the deception, we'll have hours on them. He checked the canyon one more time, then gestured. Stay close. Step where I step. If I tell you to freeze, you don't move until I say. Understood? They both nodded. Takwa led them out into the growing heat of morning. The deer path he'd spotted was barely visible, just a slight depression in the rock face where countless hooves had worn away stone over generations. It started gradual, but quickly steepened, requiring hands as much as feet. Takwa went first, testing each hold before trusting his weight to it. Lily, you're next. Put your hands where I put mine. Don't look down. He helped the girl onto the first rise. She was light and nimble, her small fingers finding cracks and edges that would have been useless to an adult. Fear made her careful, and careful kept her alive. Eliza came last, her face pale with pain and effort. Every movement jarred her wounded arm despite the sling. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her breathing came harsh and labored. Twice she had to stop, pressing her forehead against the warm stone while she fought down waves of dizziness. Each time, Takwa climbed back down to her, steadying her with his presence more than his words. They were 50 feet up when the riders appeared below. 4 men on horseback, emerging from the canyon bend with weapons drawn. Hollis Crane rode at the front, his thick beard unmistakable even from this distance. They approached the line shack cautiously, guns trained on the door. When they saw the smoke from the chimney, Crane gestured and 2 men dismounted. "Don't move." Takwa's whisper was barely audible. "Don't even breathe loud." Below, the 2 men kicked in the door of the line shack. Shouts followed, then cursing as they realized the deception. Crane's voice carried up the canyon walls. "Search the area." They can't have gone far. The woman's wounded. The men spread out, studying the ground. One of them, a Mexican with a red bandana, was clearly the tracker. He moved in widening circles, reading the dust and stone. Takwa watched him with growing concern. A good tracker could follow sign that most men wouldn't even notice. Scuff marks on rocks, disturbed pebbles, the slight discoloration where sweat had dripped onto stone. The tracker stopped, looked up. His eyes swept the canyon wall in a slow arc. "Climb." Takwa kept his voice low but urgent. "Climb now." They scrambled upward. Eliza bit back cries of pain as her wounded arm was jostled and strained. Lily moved with the desperate speed of a terrified child. Below, the tracker was pointing, shouting to his companions. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck rock 10 feet below them, spraying stone chips. "Keep moving." Takwa positioned himself between the shooters and his charges. Another shot rang out, this one closer. He felt the wind of its passing against his cheek. He couldn't return fire without stopping, and stopping meant dying. So he climbed, pushing Lily ahead of him, reaching back to haul Eliza up by her good arm when her strength faltered. The rim appeared above them, a line where red stone met blue sky. So close, 50 more feet, 40 bullets whined and sparked against the rocks. Takwa heard Crane screaming orders below. "Get up there. I want them alive. The woman and child alive. The savage can die." Lily reached the rim first. She scrambled over the edge and collapsed on solid ground, sobbing with relief and terror. Takwa pulled himself up next, then reached down for Eliza. She was at the end of her strength, her face grey, blood seeping through the bandage where stitches had torn. He gripped her wrist and pulled. She cried out but didn't let go. With a final desperate heave, he got her over the rim. They lay on the flat stone, chests heaving, while bullets continued to strike the cliff edge. Takwa crawled to the rim and risked a look down. The riders were at the base of the cliff, 2 of them starting up the path. They'd be slower than his group had been, burdened with weapons and gear, but they were coming. He had maybe 15 minutes before they reached the top. "Can you run?" he asked Eliza. She looked at him with eyes that held more determination than strength. "I'll die trying if that's what it takes." "Good enough." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. The canyon rim stretched flat and wide, dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. To the north, maybe 3 miles distant, a line of darker green suggested water, a creek or river flowing down from the mountains. If they could reach it, follow it east, they'd have cover and a water source. They ran. It wasn't elegant or fast. Eliza stumbled every few steps, and Takwa had to support most of her weight. Lily ran ahead, her small legs pumping with desperate energy. Behind them, shouts rose from the rim as the first pursuer crested the cliff. A rifle shot cracked across the open ground. The bullet kicked up dust 20 yards to their left. Too far for accurate shooting, but close enough to terrify. Takwa didn't look back. Looking back was for the dead. He focused on the green line ahead, on keeping Eliza moving, on matching his pace to what her wounded body could manage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another shot. Closer. The pursuer was finding his range. Takwa made a decision. He stopped, spun, brought his Winchester up in one smooth motion and fired. The distance was over 100 yards, but he'd been shooting since he could walk. The rifle was as much a part of him as his hands. The shot took the lead pursuer in the leg. The man went down screaming. His companion dove for cover. That bought them time. Not much, but enough. Takwa grabbed Eliza and they ran again, eating up ground while their pursuers were pinned. The green line grew closer. He could hear water now, the musical sound of a creek tumbling over stones. Trees appeared, cottonwoods and willows clustered along the banks. Cover, safety, almost there. They crashed into the tree line and immediately turned east, following the creek upstream. The water was shallow but clear, running cold from mountain snowmelt. Takwa led them into the creek bed itself, wading through water that came to their knees. It would hide their tracks, make them harder to follow. Why did you help us? Eliza's question came between gasping breaths. Yesterday in the canyon. You could have ridden past, pretended you saw nothing. Why did you stop? Takwa kept his eyes on the terrain ahead, watching for ambush points or good defensive positions. My father used to say that every time you choose to do nothing in the face of evil, you become a little less human. I've seen enough of what men like Crane do to women and children. I'm not going to stand by and let it happen when I can stop it. But you don't know us. We're just strangers. Everyone's a stranger until they're not. He guided them around a bend in the creek where the banks rose steep and defensible. My people have a saying, we're all related. Every person you meet carries a piece of the same spirit that lives in you. When you help a stranger, you're really helping yourself. Or who you could become if the world was different. Lily had stopped ahead, her small form swaying with exhaustion. Takwa reached her in 3 strides, catching her before she fell. He lifted the child onto his shoulders, ignoring the added weight. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his hair. Behind them, voices carried through the trees. The pursuit had reached the creek. Takwa increased their pace, splashing through water that soaked their clothes and numbed their legs. Eliza was at her limit, running on pure will, her face twisted with pain. Blood had soaked through the bandage completely now, running down her arm in thin red streams. The creek bent north, following a natural cut in the landscape. Takwa followed it, knowing that every bend, every twist put distance and confusion between them and their hunters. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Sweat ran into his eyes. His shoulders burned from Lily's weight. But he didn't slow down. There, Eliza's voice was barely audible. She pointed with her good arm toward an outcropping of rock that overhung the creek. Beneath it, erosion had carved out a shallow cave, barely deep enough to hide 3 people, but dark enough that someone passing might miss it. Takwa considered for only a second before nodding. They couldn't run forever, and Eliza was about to collapse. Better to hide and hope the pursuers passed them by than to keep running until she couldn't move at all. He lifted Lily down from his shoulders and guided them into the cave. The ceiling was low, forcing them to crawl. The stone was cool and damp, smelling of earth and old water. They huddled in the darkness, 3 bodies pressed together in the tight space. Takwa positioned himself at the entrance, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the creek beyond. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat settled into the steady rhythm of a hunter waiting for prey. Minutes passed. The sound of the creek masked other noises, making it impossible to tell how close the pursuers had come. Then through the musical sound of water, voices, rough male voices cursing and arguing, lost them. That was Hollis Crane, his anger evident even at a distance. How do you lose a wounded woman and a child, you useless bastards? So they went in the water. The tracker's voice was calmer, professional. Could have gone upstream or down. Could have left the creek anywhere in the last mile. Without dogs, we're tracking blind. Then we get dogs. I'm not letting this go. That savage made me look like a fool. The woman saw our faces. They both have to die or we hang. Maybe we should cut our losses. A third voice, younger, uncertain. We got nothing from that wagon. All this killing over nothing. The sound of a fist hitting flesh. A cry of pain. You want to run? Run. But you'll hang just the same when they find those dead horses and that shot-up wagon. We finish this or we die doing it. Those are your choices. Silence. Then the sound of boots moving through water. They were close, maybe 50 feet from the cave. Takwa's finger tightened on the trigger. If they looked in this direction, if they saw the darkness of the cave mouth, he'd have to kill them. All of them. At this range, he could do it. But the noise would bring others, and he was down to maybe 20 rounds. The boots stopped, right outside the cave. So close Takwa could hear the man's breathing. Heavy, labored. The thin man with the shoulder wound. He'd lagged behind the others. Now he stood in the creek, 10 feet from where they hid, looking up and down the banks. Come on, Crane's voice from upstream. They're not here. We'll double back, check the other direction. The thin man turned and splashed away, following his companions. Takwa didn't move, didn't breathe. He waited until the voices faded completely before allowing himself to relax. Behind him, Eliza let out a shaking breath. Lily hadn't made a sound, her hand clamped over her own mouth. They waited in the cave until the sun began its descent toward evening. Eliza's wound had stopped bleeding, but her face was flushed with fever. Infection was setting in despite Takwa's care. She needed real medicine, a doctor, not just the crude field dressing he could provide. Fort Verde was still more than a day away, and night travel through unfamiliar country was asking for broken bones or worse. We'll stay here tonight. Takwa made the decision carefully. In the morning, if there's no sign of Crane, we head for the fort. But you need rest, and your body needs time to fight that infection. I'm slowing you down. Eliza's voice was thick with fever and guilt. If you left us, took Lily and went ahead, you could reach the fort by tomorrow. I'm not leaving you. Why not? I'll die anyway if this infection gets worse. At least save my daughter. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears and the shine of fever. Please, I'm begging you. Leave me here. Just save my child. Takwa looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who'd already lost her husband, who'd been shot and chased and terrorized, who was now offering to die alone in a cave if it meant her daughter might live. He thought about his own mother, dying of smallpox, while his father held her hand. He thought about courage and sacrifice and all the ways people found strength when everything else had been stripped away. I won't let both of you die here. His voice was firm, final. We're getting to Fort Verde, all three of us, together. That's not negotiable. Eliza's face crumpled. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the cool stone. You're a fool. Probably. He allowed himself a small smile. But I'm a stubborn fool. My father always said it was my worst quality. Night fell. Takwa kept watch while Eliza and Lily slept, their bodies pressed together for warmth in the chill darkness of the cave. Outside, the creek murmured its endless song. Stars appeared overhead, cold and distant. Somewhere in the darkness, Hollis Crane and his men were making camp, planning their next move, deciding how much vengeance was worth. Takwa checked his ammunition again. 19 rounds left. Not enough for a sustained fight. He'd have to be smart, use the terrain, pick his shots carefully. But if it came down to dying or letting Crane take Eliza and Lily, there was no question which choice he'd make. He'd given his word. Not out loud, but in the moment he'd pulled that trigger in the canyon and sent Crane's men running. Word spoken or not, a promise was a promise. And Takwa had never broken his word. Dawn would bring new challenges. But for now, in the darkness of the cave with 2 lives depending on his choices, Takwa kept watch and waited for morning. Morning came with mist rising from the creek, turning the canyon into a landscape of ghosts and shadows. Takwa woke from a half-sleep where his body had rested, but his mind remained alert to every sound. His back ached from sitting against stone all night, and his legs had gone numb from the cramped position. He flexed his fingers, working feeling back into them before reaching for his rifle. Eliza's fever had broken sometime in the dark hours before dawn. She lay curled around Lily, her breathing easier now, though her face still carried the pallor of someone who'd pushed beyond exhaustion into something deeper. The wound on her arm looked angry and swollen beneath the bandage, red streaks radiating from the stitches. Infection was still present, still fighting her body's attempts to heal. Lily woke when Takwa moved, her eyes opening with the instant alertness of a child who'd learned that danger didn't wait for full consciousness. She looked at him with those solemn brown eyes, then at her mother, then back to him. "Is Mama going to die?" The question deserved honesty. "Not if I can help it, but she needs medicine I don't have. We need to reach Fort Verde today." He crawled to the cave entrance and studied the creek. No signs of movement, no sounds of horses or men. The morning birds sang their territorial claims, undisturbed by human presence. That was good. Birds went silent when danger approached. He turned back to find Eliza awake, watching him with eyes that had regained some clarity. How long was I asleep?" Most of the night. Your fever broke maybe 2 hours ago." He moved to her side, checking the wound without unwrapping it. The heat radiating through the bandage told him what he needed to know. "We're moving as soon as you can stand. Fort Verde is maybe 8 miles northeast. If we push hard, we can make it by afternoon." 8 miles. Eliza's laugh was bitter and exhausted. "I can barely crawl out of this cave, and you want me to walk 8 miles. I want you to live. Walking 8 miles is how that happens." He offered her water from his canteen. She drank deeply, then helped Lily drink. The child's lips were cracked and dry, despite the creek water they'd consumed yesterday. Dehydration was setting in for all of them. They emerged from the cave into golden morning light that seemed too beautiful for a world filled with men hunting them. Takwa helped Eliza to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. She was weaker than yesterday, the infection and blood loss taking their toll. He studied her face, calculating odds and possibilities. She might make 8 miles. She might collapse after 2. There was no way to know except to try. Stay in the creek as long as possible. He lifted Lily onto his back again, the child's arms wrapping around his neck with practiced ease. "The water will hide our tracks and keep you cool. When I say we leave the creek, we move fast and don't stop." "Understood." They moved upstream, following the water as it cut through increasingly rugged terrain. The canyon walls grew taller here, pressing close on either side. In places, the creek narrowed to barely 6 feet across, the water running swift and cold over smooth stones. Eliza stumbled often, catching herself on rocks and tree roots, her good hand gripping whatever was near to keep herself upright. 2 miles passed in painful slowness. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and replacing it with heat that made the air shimmer. Takwa's shoulders ached from Lily's weight, but the girl never complained, never asked to be put down. She'd learned in these few days what some adults never understood about survival. Complaints used energy, and energy was the difference between living and dying. The creek bent sharply east, and Takwa stopped. Ahead, the water disappeared into a narrow gorge where the walls came together so tight that a man could touch both sides at once. There was no way through for someone carrying a child, and the walls were too smooth to climb. They'd have to leave the creek here, strike out overland. "We go up." He pointed to the southern canyon wall, where a game trail switchbacked up the steep slope. "Once we're on top, Fort Verde should be visible. Maybe 5 miles as the crow flies." "I can't climb that." Eliza looked at the trail with despair. "Takwa, I'm sorry, but I can't." "Then I'll carry you." He said it matter-of-factly, as if carrying a grown woman up a canyon wall while already burdened with a child was no more difficult than walking across flat ground. "That's impossible." "Impossible is leaving you here to die." He studied the trail, planning the route. "Lily, you're going to have to walk this part. Can you do that?" The girl nodded, sliding down from his back. Her legs were unsteady, but she stood without falling. Takwa turned to Eliza. "Get on my back." Arms around my neck, legs around my waist. Hold on tight and don't let go no matter what. This is insane, probably. But we're doing it anyway. He crouched, presenting his back. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza climbed on. She was lighter than she should have been, her body wasted by hardship and illness. He stood carefully, adjusting to the weight distribution. His legs trembled slightly, then steadied. Lily, stay right behind me. Step where I step. The climb was brutal. Each step required careful placement, testing the ground before committing his weight. Loose stones skittered down the slope with every movement, clattering into the creek below. Takwa's thighs burned within minutes, muscles screaming protest as he drove himself upward. Sweat soaked through his shirt, running into his eyes. Halfway up, his boot slipped on loose gravel. He pitched forward, catching himself on one knee, Eliza's weight nearly toppling them both backward. She gasped, her arms tightening around his neck until he couldn't breathe. He didn't tell her to loosen her grip. Fear was keeping her conscious, and conscious was better than the alternative. Keep going. Her whisper was hot against his ear. Don't stop. If you stop, I won't be able to start again. So he didn't stop. He climbed with the steady, grinding determination of someone who'd long ago learned that the only way through suffering was straight ahead. Lily followed, her small body scrambling up the trail with the agility of youth. Once she slipped, her foot missing its hold, and Takwa's hand shot out to catch her arm before she could fall. He held her steady until she found her footing again. The rim came suddenly, the ground leveling out into scrubland, dotted with juniper and sage. Takwa took 3 more steps onto flat ground, then his legs gave out. He went down hard on his knees, Eliza sliding off his back with a cry. They lay on the hot earth, chests heaving, muscles quivering with exhaustion. We made it. Lily's voice carried wonder and disbelief in equal measure. She stood over them, her small face filthy with dust and tear tracks, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. Takwa forced himself to stand. His legs didn't want to cooperate, but he made them anyway. He pulled Eliza up more gently, supporting her weight as they moved away from the canyon rim. To the northeast, maybe 4 miles distant, he could see buildings. Adobe structures clustered around what looked like a wooden palisade. Fort Verde, salvation if they could reach it. Death trap if Hollis Crane got there first. We're exposed up here. He scanned the landscape, looking for cover. The scrubland offered little. A few scattered boulders, some shallow washes where flash floods had carved temporary channels. Not enough to hide from determined hunters. We need to move fast and hope they're still searching the canyon below. They ran. It was more of a stumbling jog, with Takwa half dragging Eliza and Lily, struggling to keep pace. The sun was merciless, beating down on them with physical weight. Takwa's canteen was empty, drained during the climb. His throat felt like it had been scoured with sand. But the fort was close, so close. They just had to keep moving. The sound of hoofbeats came from behind them, faint at first but growing rapidly louder. Takwa risked a look back and felt his heart drop. 4 riders cresting the canyon rim, spreading out in a line as soon as they spotted their prey. Hollis Crane rode in the center, his rifle already coming up. Run! Takwa shoved Eliza forward, putting himself between her and the riders. Head for that wash, the deep one, 30 yards ahead. Get in it and keep your heads down. What about you? I'm going to slow them down. Go. He turned to face the riders, his Winchester coming up smooth and fast. The range was long, maybe 200 yards and growing shorter every second. He dropped to one knee, steadied his breathing and fired. The lead rider's horse went down, tumbling head over heels in a spray of dust and blood. The man flew clear, landing hard and not moving. Takwa worked the lever, ejected the spent brass, chambered a new round. Fired again. This shot went wide, but it made the other 3 riders scatter, looking for cover where there was none. He ran then, sprinting for the wash where Eliza and Lily had disappeared. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet, snapping past his head with sounds like angry hornets. He dove the last 10 feet, sliding down into the wash on his stomach. Eliza grabbed him, pulling him deeper into the meager cover. "How many rounds do you have left?" Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. 16. He checked the rifle, then his ammunition pouch. 16 rounds between them and death. Not enough for a sustained fight. They'll try to flank us. Circle around, come at us from 2 directions. When they do, I need you to take Lily and run for the fort. Don't look back, don't stop, just run. I won't leave you to die. You will if it means Lily lives. He met her eyes directly. That's not negotiable. Your daughter's life is worth more than mine, worth more than both of ours. You know that's true. Before Eliza could answer, a voice called from the scrubland. Tarqua, that's your name, right? The Spokane. It was Hollis Crane, closer than expected. Maybe 50 yards away, using a boulder for cover. You've led us on a fine chase. Killed one of my men, wounded 2 others. That's a debt that needs paying. Tarqua didn't answer. Talking was what men did when they were stalling, and he had nothing to gain from delay. I'm a reasonable man. Crane's voice carried the false reasonableness of someone making an offer they knew would be refused. Send out the woman and the girl. You can walk away. I got no particular grudge against you beyond the men you hurt. But they saw my face. They can identify me. That means they die. Simple business. Still, Tarqua said nothing. His eyes tracked the scrubland, looking for movement. There, 30 yards to the left, a man crawling through the sage. The thin one with the shoulder wound, trying to flank them while Crane kept him talking. Or we can do this the hard way. Crane's tone shifted, losing the false warmth. I got time and ammunition. You got neither. Sun's going to cook you in that wash like meat in a Dutch oven. By afternoon, you'll be so desperate for water, you won't be able to hold that rifle steady. Then we'll just walk up and take what's ours. Movement to the right now. The Mexican tracker also flanking. They were good, Tarqua had to admit. Patient and professional. In different circumstances, he might have respected their skill. In these circumstances, he just needed them dead. He sighted on the thin man first, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The thin man jerked and went still. Tarqua swung right, finding the tracker. But the Mexican had gone to ground, disappeared into the sage like a ghost. Smart. He'd learned from watching his companion die. That's 2 of mine you've killed. Crane's voice had gone flat and cold. I'm done being reasonable. We're coming for you. And when we drag you out of that wash, I'm going to make you watch while I do things to that woman that'll make her beg for death. Then I'll do the same to the child. And you'll die knowing you failed them both. Rage flared hot in Tarqua's chest, but he forced it down. Anger made men stupid, and stupid got them killed. He needed clarity, precision, the cold calculation of a hunter who'd learned early that emotion was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. Mama, I'm scared. Lily's whisper was barely audible. I know, sweet girl. Eliza pulled her daughter close, pressing her face into Lily's hair. But Tarqua is going to protect us. He promised, had he? Tarqua couldn't remember making that promise explicitly. But looking at them now, this woman and child who'd somehow become his responsibility in the span of 2 days, he realized the promise had been implicit in every choice he'd made since firing that first shot in the canyon. Some promises didn't need words. The Mexican tracker made his move. He came fast and low, a knife in his hand instead of a gun. Close quarters weapon for close quarters work. He must have circled wide, using the terrain to mask his approach. He was good, but Tarqua was better. The Winchester barked once. The tracker's forward momentum carried him 3 more steps before his legs gave out, and he collapsed, face first in the dust. His knife fell from nerveless fingers, blade glinting in the harsh sunlight that left Crane and 1 more man. Tarqua had seen 4 riders, killed 3. The 4th was out there somewhere, probably with a rifle, probably drawing a bead on this wash right now. Tarqua made himself small, pressing against the wash's far bank, where the angle would make a shot difficult. Impressive shooting. Crane's voice came from a different position now. He was moving, making himself a harder target. But you're down to what, 13 rounds, 12? How many of those are you willing to waste before you realize you can't win this? You don't need to win. Tarqua spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clear across the scrubland. Just need to survive long enough. Long enough for what? Ain't nobody coming to save you out here. Maybe, maybe not. Takwa had spotted something in the distance, back toward Fort Verde, a dust cloud moving fast. Riders coming from the fort. Could be cavalry patrol. Could be supply wagon. Could be nothing. But Crane couldn't know that. And uncertainty was a weapon as effective as any bullet. The fourth man broke cover, running hard toward the wash with his rifle at his shoulder. Desperate move, born of frustration and fear. Takwa tracked him smoothly, led the target just right, and fired. The man went down mid-stride, his rifle spinning away into the sage. Silence fell over the scrubland. Just Crane left now. One man against one man, with two lives hanging in the balance. The odds had finally evened. You're good. Crane's voice carried grudging respect. Better than I gave you credit for. But this ain't over. Even if you kill me, there'll be others. Men who knew those riders, who'll come looking for answers. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the bullet you don't see coming. Been doing that since I was born. Takwa reloaded methodically, replacing the spent rounds in his rifle. Being Indian on the frontier means always watching for the knife aimed at your back. You think you're threatening me with something new? The dust cloud from Fort Verde was closer now. Definitely riders. 4 or 5 of them moving at a steady pace. Not racing, but not dawdling either. Takwa watched Crane's position, waiting for the moment when the outlaw would notice cavalry patrol. Crane's curse carried clearly. You lucky savage. You shouldn't have made it this far. A pause, then. This ain't finished. I'll remember your face. Remember the woman. Remember that little girl. Someday, somewhere, I'll see you again. And when I do, there won't be any cavalry coming to save you. I'll look forward to it. Takwa kept his rifle trained on the boulder where Crane hid. You run now, you might make it to the canyon before they spot you. Stay here talking, and you'll be explaining to a circuit judge why you killed all those people. Movement behind the boulder. Crane breaking cover, running hard for his horse. Takwa had a clear shot, could have ended it right there. But killing a man in the back while he fled sat wrong, even when that man deserved killing. He let Crane go, watching as the outlaw mounted and spurred his horse toward the canyon rim. The cavalry patrol changed direction, angling to intercept. They'd spotted Crane, were moving to cut him off. Takwa allowed himself a small smile. Maybe justice would be served after all. Maybe not. Either way, the immediate threat was past. He turned to Eliza and Lily, both staring at him with expressions that mixed relief and shock, and something else he couldn't quite name. It's over. We're safe. Eliza's face crumpled. She pulled Lily tight against her chest and began to cry, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deeper than tears. Lily cried too, her small body shuddering with released tension. They clung to each other while Takwa stood watch, his rifle ready in case Crane doubled back or the cavalry patrol proved hostile. But the patrol passed by Crane's position, chasing him toward the canyon. Within minutes, both had disappeared from view. The scrubland fell silent again except for the wind moving through the sage and the sound of 2 survivors crying out their fear and relief. "Can you walk?" Takwa asked when the tears had slowed. "Fort's maybe 2 miles from here. We should get there before those soldiers come back with questions." Eliza wiped her eyes with her good hand. "I can walk. I can do whatever I need to do." She stood on shaking legs, pulling Lily up with her. "You saved our lives. How do I thank you for something like that?" "Go, you live." Takwa shouldered his rifle and started walking toward Fort Verde. "You take care of that girl. Raise her strong and smart." "That's thanks enough." They walked across the scrubland in silence, 3 figures casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Behind them lay death and violence and the hard choices that survival demanded. Ahead lay uncertainty but also possibility. Fort Verde would have a doctor for Eliza's wound, would have food and water and safety at least for a while. As they walked, Takwa thought about Crane's parting threat. The outlaw was right. This wasn't finished. Men like Crane didn't forgive, didn't forget. Someday, somewhere, their paths would cross again. But that was a problem for another day. Today's problem had been keeping these 2 alive, and he'd managed that much at least. The fort's wooden palisade rose before them, solid and reassuring after days of running. Guards on the walls called out challenges. Takwa raised his hands, showing he carried no immediate threat. Beside him, Eliza stumbled and nearly fell. He caught her, steadied her, and together they covered the last 100 yards to the gate. The gates opened. Soldiers poured out, weapons ready but not aimed. An officer in cavalry blue stepped forward, his eyes taking in their condition with professional assessment. "Who are you people? What happened out there?" "And the survivors." Takwa's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. "This woman needs medical attention. The child needs food and water. I need to speak with your commander about a man named Hollis Crane and 3 murders in the canyon." The officer's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "Get them inside. Find the surgeon. And someone fetch Major Thornton immediately." He looked at Takwa with new respect. "You're a long way from any Spokane land, friend. What brings you to this hell?" "Choice." Takwa helped Eliza through the gate. Lily pressed close to her mother's side. "Just choice." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The fort's interior was a different world from the hostile wilderness beyond its walls. Wooden buildings lined a central parade ground where soldiers drilled in the afternoon heat, their movements precise despite the temperature. Adobe structures served as barracks, officers' quarters, and storage facilities. The surgeon's office occupied a corner building near the main gate, its windows thrown open to catch any breeze that might venture through. The surgeon was a thin man in his 50s named Dr. Garrett Moss, with wire-rimmed spectacles and hands that moved with careful efficiency. He'd seen enough frontier wounds to recognize severity at a glance. One look at Eliza's arm and he was barking orders to his assistant, a young private who scrambled to prepare instruments and bandages. "Get her on the table. The child can sit there." He pointed to a chair in the corner. "You the Spokane, you're bleeding from somewhere. Where?" "The tub." Takwa looked down and realized Dr. Moss was right. His shirt was dark with blood along his left side. He'd been so focused on getting Eliza and Lily to safety that he hadn't registered the pain. Now that attention was drawn to it, the wound announced itself with sharp insistence. One of Crane's bullets must have grazed him during the final fight. Just a graze. He pulled the shirt aside to reveal a shallow furrow across his ribs. The bleeding had mostly stopped, clotted by movement and dust. That just a graze will be infected by tomorrow if not treated. Dr. Moss gestured to a second table. "Sit, I'll deal with you after I handle the woman. Private Hammond, get him cleaned up and see if anything vital got hit." Private Hammond was barely 20, with nervous hands but a gentle touch. He cleaned Takwa's wound with water and carbolic acid that stung worse than the original bullet. The young soldier worked in silence for a few minutes before speaking quietly. "The officers are talking, saying you killed 4 men out in the Badlands. That true?" 3, Takwa corrected. "One got away. Why'd you do it?" "They said you're not from around here. Could have just kept riding." Takwa watched Dr. Moss work on Eliza across the room. The surgeon had given her something for the pain, and she lay still while he cut away the infected tissue around the wound. Lily sat in her chair, clutching her wooden doll, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. "Because walking away would have made me someone I don't want to be." Hammond considered this while he bandaged the wound. "I enlisted because I wanted to do something that mattered. Protect settlers, fight hostiles, make the territory safe. But most days it's just drilling and guard duty and breaking up fights between drunk soldiers. You did more good in 2 days than I've done in 2 years. You're young. You'll get your chance to matter." Takwa said it without irony. The frontier had a way of forcing choices on people, whether they wanted them or not. Dr. Moss finished with Eliza and moved to Takwa, inspecting Hammond's work with a critical eye. "Adequate bandaging, Private. The wound's clean, no deep damage. You'll be sore for a week, but you'll live." He turned his attention to Takwa's face. "You've got cheekbones that suggest Spokane heritage, but your eyes are lighter than most. Mixed blood. And my mother was Spokane. My father was a French trapper who stayed long enough to give me a name and then disappeared into the mountains." Takwa had told this story enough times that it came out flat and factual. I grew up between two worlds, never quite fitting in either one. That's the story of this whole damn territory. Dr. Moss cleaned his instruments with methodical care. Everyone's from somewhere else, trying to make something new. Some days, I think we're building a better world. Other days, I think we're just spreading the same old misery across fresh ground. He glanced at Eliza, now sleeping under the influence of laudanum. That woman's strong. Stronger than she knows. Another day without treatment, and she'd have lost the arm, maybe her life. But she'll heal now. The door opened, and a man in an officer's uniform entered. He was in his 40s, with iron-grey hair and a mustache waxed to sharp points. His uniform was immaculate, despite the dust and heat, and his bearing spoke of someone accustomed to command. I'm Major Marcus Thornton, commander of this post. Dr. Moss, how are the patients? Datusus, the woman will recover with rest and care. The child is unharmed. The Spokane has a flesh wound that's been treated. Dr. Moss didn't look up from cleaning his instruments. They all need food, water, and sleep. Beyond that, they're your problem, not mine. Major Thornton's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Always a pleasure, Doctor. He turned his attention to Takwa. My patrol brought in a man named Hollis Crane about an hour ago. He's currently in the stockade, though he's refusing to answer questions. He claims you're a murderer who attacked his party without provocation. Care to give me your version? Takwa told the story from the beginning. The woman's scream in the canyon, the 4 men threatening Eliza and Lily, the gunfight, the chase, the days of running. He left out nothing, including the 3 men he'd killed and why. Major Thornton listened without interrupting, his expression giving away nothing. When Takwa finished, the major was silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "That's quite a tale. Problem is, it's your word against Crane's. No witnesses except a woman and child who'd naturally side with their rescuer. No bodies to examine since you say they're scattered across the Badlands. Just 2 stories, and no way to prove which is true. Check the canyon where it started." Takwa met the major's eyes directly. "You'll find a broken wagon, 2 dead horses shot through the head, and spent brass from multiple weapons. Check the campsite where Crane's men waited during the night. You'll find more evidence. The land doesn't lie. No, but it doesn't testify in court either." Major Thornton moved to the window, looking out at the parade ground. "Here's my situation. Hollis Crane is known to me. He's been suspected of various crimes across the territory, but nothing proven. He has money, connections, and a lawyer who's very good at creating reasonable doubt. You, on the other hand, are a half-breed Spokane with no permanent address and a story that involves killing 3 white men. Even if every word you say is true, you're going to have a hard time convincing a judge or jury, so justice depends on skin color and money." Takwa said it without bitterness. It was simply a fact of frontier life, no more surprising than sunrise. Justice depends on evidence and advocacy. You have limited evidence and no advocacy. The major turned back from the window. "But I'm not interested in easy answers. I'm interested in truth. So here's what's going to happen. You're staying at the fort as my guest, not my prisoner. I'm sending a patrol to verify your story. If they find what you say they'll find, Crane hangs. If they find something different, we'll have a different conversation, and the woman and child. Oh, Mrs. Morgan has a sister stationed here, married to one of my lieutenants. I've already sent word. She'll be here within the hour." Major Thornton's expression softened slightly. "The child will be cared for. You have my word on that." Relief washed through Takwa, more intense than he'd expected. He'd kept Eliza and Lily alive, gotten them to safety. His part in this story was done. He could leave now, return to his people, forget any of this had happened. Except he knew he wouldn't forget. Knew that Eliza's desperate plea in the cave, Lily's small hand gripping his neck, the weight of responsibility for lives other than his own. These things had changed something fundamental inside him. A woman burst through the door, her dress dusty from running across the compound. She was younger than Eliza, maybe 25, with the same wheat-colored hair and brown eyes. "Where is she?" "Where's my sister?" Her gaze found Eliza on the table, and she rushed over, her hands hovering uncertainly. "Oh God, Eliza, what happened?" Your sister encountered trouble on the trail. She's been wounded, but Dr. Moss says she'll recover. Major Thornton's voice was gentle. Are you Mrs. Sarah Mitchell? Yes, Lieutenant Mitchell is my husband. Sarah's eyes found Lily in the corner, and fresh tears appeared. Lily, oh sweetheart, come here. She opened her arms, and the child launched herself across the room, finally allowing herself to cry fully against her aunt's shoulder. Sarah held her niece while looking at Eliza, with an expression that mixed love and fear and guilt. I should have gone to Tucson. Should have brought them here myself after Thomas died. But William said the trail was too dangerous, that it was better to wait for spring. You couldn't have known. Dr. Moss spoke gently. The frontier teaches hard lessons. Sometimes there's no right choice, just different flavors of wrong. The door opened again, and a young lieutenant entered, his uniform bearing the insignia of cavalry. He moved immediately to Sarah's side. I came as soon as I heard. His eyes took in Eliza's condition and Lily's tear-stained face. Are they all right? They will be. Sarah looked up at her husband. William, this is my sister Eliza and my niece Lily. They're going to stay with us until Eliza heals. However long that takes. Lieutenant William Mitchell nodded without hesitation. Of course. Whatever they need. He turned to Major Thornton. Sir, request permission to be excused from duties to help settle my family. Granted. Take the rest of the day. Major Thornton watched the reunion with an expression that might have been approval. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Moss, will want to keep your sister here for observation tonight. You're welcome to stay with her. Private Hammond will bring bedding and food. Sarah nodded gratefully, returning her attention to Lily and Eliza. The child had stopped crying and was now telling her aunt about the wagon breaking, about the bad men, about how Takwa had saved them. Her words tumbled over each other in the rush of finally feeling safe enough to speak. Major Thornton gestured for Takwa to follow him outside. They walked across the parade ground toward the officers' quarters, soldiers stopping to stare at the Spokane man walking beside their commander. Takwa ignored the attention. He'd spent his life being stared at, examined, judged by people who saw his mixed heritage as something to be questioned. You did a remarkable thing out there, the major spoke quietly, for Takwa's ears only. Most men would have ridden past that canyon. The ones who stopped would have been dead within minutes. You not only engaged 4 armed men, you kept 2 civilians alive for 3 days while being hunted across hostile territory. That takes skill, courage, and something harder to quantify, purpose. I did what needed doing. Takwa didn't know how to respond to praise. His father had taught him that actions spoke louder than words, and that a man who needed recognition for doing right wasn't doing it for the right reasons. Hey, that's why I'm offering you a position. Major Thornton stopped walking, turning to face Takwa directly. This fort needs scouts, men who know the land, who can track, who can fight when necessary but prefer not to. Men who understand both the native peoples and the settlers, who can bridge that gap before it becomes a canyon too wide to cross. You're exactly what I need. The offer caught Takwa off guard. He'd expected questions, maybe suspicion, possibly arrest, despite the major's assurances. He hadn't expected a job offer. I'm not a soldier. I don't need another soldier. I need a scout, someone who can move through territory the cavalry can't reach, who can talk to tribes that shoot at blue uniforms on sight, who can find people before they become problems. Major Thornton's voice was earnest. The frontier is changing. The old ways of solving everything with bullets and treaties written on lies, that's ending. We need new ways, better ways. You could be part of that. Takwa looked back at the surgeon's building where Eliza and Lily were finally safe. He thought about the last 3 days, about the choices he'd made and the lives he'd saved. He thought about returning to his people, to the quiet life he'd built, to hunting and fishing and trying to pretend the world wasn't changing around him. I need time to think about it, he said finally. My people are expecting me back. I have responsibilities there, of course. Take whatever time you need. Major Thornton resumed walking. The offer stands indefinitely. If you decide you want to make a difference beyond your own tribe, beyond your own life, the door's open. They reached the officers' mess, where Major Thornton arranged for Takwa to have a meal and a place to sleep. The food was simple but abundant, and Takwa ate with the focused intensity of someone who'd been running on empty for days. Other officers nodded politely, but kept their distance, uncertain how to approach this Spokane, who'd somehow earned the Major's respect. After eating, Takwa was shown to a small room in the visiting quarters. It had a bed, a chair, and a window overlooking the parade ground. Luxury compared to sleeping in caves and hiding in creek beds. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and then allowed himself to lie down. Sleep should have come easily. His body was exhausted, his mind stretched thin from constant vigilance. But instead he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Major Thornton's offer. Thinking about Eliza's gratitude and Lily's trust. Thinking about how it felt to matter, to make a difference, to be more than just another survivor, trying to make it through another day. His father's voice spoke in memory. A man can live for himself, or he can live for something larger. The first path is easier. The second is better. At the time, Takwa had thought he understood. Now, lying in a room at Fort Verde, while a woman and child he'd saved slept safely nearby, he realized he'd only begun to grasp what his father meant. Somewhere in the fort, Hollis Crane sat in a cell, plotting revenge or planning escape or simply accepting his fate. Takwa knew the outlaw wouldn't forget, wouldn't forgive. If Crane escaped justice, he'd come looking. And next time he'd bring more men, better planning, deadlier intent. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight Eliza and Lily were safe. Tonight justice had a fighting chance. Tonight Takwa could rest, knowing he'd kept his promise. Spoken or not, he closed his eyes and finally slept, dreamless and deep, while the desert night settled over Fort Verde like a blanket stitched from stars. 3 days passed in the strange limbo of recovery and waiting. Eliza's wound showed signs of proper healing, the angry red streaks fading under Dr. Moss's careful treatment. She stayed with Sarah and Lieutenant Mitchell in their quarters, a small adobe house near the eastern wall where Lily could play in a dusty yard, under the watchful eyes of soldiers who'd taken a shine to the brave little girl. Takwa spent those days in careful observation, learning the rhythms of Fort Verde, while Major Thornton's patrol searched the Badlands for evidence. He watched morning drills, studied the way cavalry units moved in formation, listened to conversations in the mess hall about Apache raids and supply shortages and the constant tension of frontier life. The soldiers treated him with wary respect, unsure whether to see him as ally or outsider, so they settled for polite distance. On the afternoon of the third day, the patrol returned. Takwa was checking his horse in the stable when he heard the commotion at the main gate. He moved quickly toward the parade ground, arriving as Major Thornton emerged from his office to meet the returning soldiers. The patrol leader, a grizzled sergeant named Kowalski, dismounted with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Report, Sergeant!" Major Thornton's voice carried across the compound. "Found everything the Spokane said we'd find. Sir," Kowalski pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag. "Broken wagon in the canyon, 2 horses shot execution style through the head. Found brass casings from multiple weapons. Tracked the chase route up through the creek drainage. Found dried blood on the rocks where someone had been wounded." He opened the satchel and pulled out personal effects. "Found these on 3 bodies scattered across the Badlands. 2 shot clean through, one with a bullet hole in his leg that got infected. Looks like he tried to crawl back to civilization and didn't make it." Major Thornton examined the items with careful attention. Wallets containing identification papers, pocket watches, weapons. "These men all have outstanding warrants. Horse theft, robbery, assault. One's wanted for murder in New Mexico territory." He looked up at Takwa, who'd remained standing at the edge of the gathering crowd. "Seems your story checks out completely." Murmurs ran through the assembled soldiers. Takwa felt the shift in how they looked at him, suspicion giving way to something closer to respect. He'd told the truth, and the land had confirmed it. "There's more, sir." Sergeant Kowalski's expression turned grim. "We found a grave near that line shack. Fresh, maybe 6 months old. Dug it up," He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what came next. Body of a young woman, Mexican from her clothes. She'd been shot multiple times. Left to rot before someone buried her shallow. The parade ground went silent. Major Thornton's face hardened into something cold and dangerous. You think Crane's gang? Yank can't prove it, sir. But the graves in territory they operated in, and the timeline fits. Kowalski gestured to another soldier, who brought forward a small wooden cross. This was on the grave. Name carved into it says Maria, nothing else. Takwa felt ice settle in his stomach. How many others had there been? How many women like Eliza, travelers who'd had the misfortune to cross paths with Hollis Crane and his men? How many had ended up in shallow graves with nothing but a wooden cross to mark their passing? And that settles it. Major Thornton's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Sergeant, prepare a detail. We're transporting Crane to Prescott for trial. I want him in front of a territorial judge within the week. He turned to address the gathered soldiers. Let it be known that Fort Verde does not tolerate murderers, thieves, or those who prey on the innocent. This man and his gang terrorized travelers, killed without mercy, and left bodies scattered across land they thought was lawless. They were wrong. The soldiers dispersed to their duties, leaving Takwa standing with Major Thornton. The commander regarded him with an expression that mixed approval and calculation. You did well out there. Better than well. You saved 2 lives and brought a killer to justice. The land did most of the work. Takwa watched the soldiers preparing horses for the transport detail. I just read what it told me. A modest. I appreciate that. Major Thornton gestured toward his office. Walk with me. There's something you need to see. Inside the office, maps covered every wall. Territorial surveys, tribal boundaries, supply routes, water sources. The collected knowledge of a military mind trying to impose order on chaos. Major Thornton moved to his desk and picked up a leather-bound journal. This belonged to one of the dead men. Sergeant Kowalski brought it back. It's a record of their activities over the past 2 years. He opened the journal, and Takwa saw pages filled with careful handwriting. Dates, locations, descriptions of robberies and assaults, names of victims, though many were listed only as Mexican woman or settler family or prospector. The casual accounting of violence made Takwa's skin crawl. 17 confirmed attacks. Major Thornton's voice was heavy, probably more that weren't recorded. Crane and his men operated with near impunity because they worked remote areas where law was scarce and witnesses scarcer. They'd hit a wagon, take what they wanted, kill anyone who could identify them, and disappear into the Badlands. He closed the journal. You stopped that. Not just for Eliza and Lily, but for everyone who won't encounter them in the future. I didn't know about the others. Takwa met the Major's eyes. I just saw a woman and child in danger and reacted. That's what makes it remarkable. You didn't act because you knew the full scope of their crimes. You acted because it was right. Major Thornton set the journal down. That's the kind of character I need in a scout. Someone who makes good decisions with incomplete information, who trusts their instincts about right and wrong. Before Takwa could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Come, Major Thornton called. Eliza entered, her wounded arm still in a sling, but her color much improved. Behind her came Sarah, holding Lily's hand. The child's face lit up when she saw Takwa. Mr. Takwa. And Sarah made cookies, and Mama said I could bring you some. She held up a cloth-wrapped bundle with obvious pride. That's very kind. Takwa accepted the bundle, noting how Lily had lost the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes in the Badlands. Children recovered faster than adults, their resilience a kind of grace. How are you feeling, Mrs. Morgan? Better every day, thanks to Dr. Moss. Eliza's smile was genuine, but carried an edge of nervousness. I heard the patrol returned, that they found evidence. They did. Major Thornton's voice was gentle. Everything Takwa told us was confirmed. Crane and his men were responsible for multiple attacks. There's enough evidence to see him hang. Relief washed across Eliza's face, followed immediately by something darker. Good. He deserves worse, but I'll settle for justice. She looked at Takwa with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. I owe you my life, my daughter's life. There's no way to repay a debt like that. You don't owe me anything, Takwa said it firmly, wanting to establish that boundary. I did what anyone should have done, but you're not anyone. You're the man who chose to help when others would have looked away. Eliza moved closer, her good hand reaching out to touch his arm briefly. Sarah and William have offered to let us stay here permanently. William says he can get me work at the fort, helping with administration or teaching the soldiers' children. It's a chance to start over, to build something stable for Lily. She paused. I wanted to tell you before you left. Wanted you to know that the lives you saved won't be wasted, but I'm glad, and he was. Seeing Eliza and Lily settled, safe, with family to support them, that felt like completion. Like the story that had started with a scream in a canyon could finally have an ending that didn't taste of ash. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Are you leaving? You can't leave. You're supposed to stay and have cookies with us. The simple plea, delivered with a child's absolute conviction that the world should bend to accommodate cookies and friendship, made something twist in Takwa's chest. He knelt to be at eye level with Lily. I have to go back to my people. They're expecting me, but you'll come back. Her eyes were huge, demanding promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Lily! Eliza's voice carried gentle warning. Takwa has his own life, his own responsibilities. We can't ask him to change all that for us. Actually, Major Thornton spoke up, his timing suspiciously convenient. I was just discussing with Takwa the possibility of him taking a position as scout for the fort. If he accepted, he'd be stationed here regularly. You'd see him quite often. All eyes turned to Takwa. He felt the weight of their expectations, each different but equally powerful. Major Thornton wanted a skilled scout who could bridge cultures. Eliza wanted reassurance that her savior hadn't disappeared forever. Lily wanted cookies and the simple security of knowing that the man who'd protected her was still within reach. And what did he want? No, I haven't decided yet. He stood, buying himself time. It's a significant choice, not one to make lightly. Of course. Major Thornton was too smooth, too understanding. Take all the time you need. The offer remains open. They left his office together, Eliza and Sarah talking quietly, while Lily skipped between them, her doll tucked under one arm. Takwa watched them go, then turned to find Major Thornton studying him with that calculating expression. You're afraid. The Major said it without judgment. Afraid that if you take this position, if you put down roots here, you'll lose something essential about who you are. My father used to say that the moment you stop moving is the moment you start dying. Takwa looked out at the parade ground, where soldiers drilled in the fading light. He never stayed in one place long. Said it made men soft, made them forget how to survive. Your father was wrong. Major Thornton's bluntness was startling, or rather he was half right. Yes, comfort can make men soft, but isolation makes them brittle. You can't grow, can't change, can't become more than you are if you're always moving, always alone. He gestured at the fort around them. This isn't about putting down roots. It's about choosing to be part of something larger than yourself. That's not weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. Takwa had no answer to that. He excused himself and walked to the stables, needing the familiar comfort of caring for his horse. The animal nickered softly as he approached, pressing its nose against his chest. He'd owned this horse for 5 years, longer than he'd stayed in any one place. Maybe that said something about his priorities. That evening, he was invited to dine with Lieutenant Mitchell's family. The small house was crowded with Eliza, Lily, Sarah, William, and himself, seated around a table built for 4. But the closeness felt comfortable rather than cramped. Sarah had prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, with the cookies Lily had promised for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, touching on safe topics. William's duties at the fort, Sarah's plans for a small garden, Lily's excitement about learning to read from a primer Sarah had found. Eliza was quiet, still recovering her strength, but her eyes held a peace that had been absent in the Badlands. After dinner, while Sarah and William cleaned up and Lily played with her doll, Eliza followed Takwa outside. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before she spoke. "I was married to Thomas for 8 years. Her voice was soft, reflective. "He was a good man, kind, steady, reliable. When he died, I thought I'd never feel safe again. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life jumping at shadows, waiting for the next disaster." She looked up at the stars. "Then you appeared in that canyon, a stranger who had no reason to care whether we lived or died. And you cared anyway. Anyone would have done the same." Even as he said it, Takwa knew it wasn't true. Most men would have ridden past, or worse, joined in the attack. No, they wouldn't have. She turned to face him directly. "I spent 3 days watching you make choices that put our lives above your own safety. Watching you care for wounds, find water, plan routes, fight off men who wanted us dead. You didn't do it for money or glory or because someone ordered you to. You did it because you're the kind of man who steps toward danger when others step away. I'm just a hunter who happened to be in the right place." He felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the weight of being seen as something more than he believed himself to be. "You're more than that, and you know it." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "Major Thornton sees it. Sarah sees it. Even Lily, at 6 years old, recognizes something special in you." She paused. "The question is whether you see it in yourself." Before he could respond, Lily burst through the door, clutching 2 cookies. "I saved you the biggest ones." She presented them with the solemnity of a sacred offering. "Aunt Sarah says if you eat them under the stars, they taste better." Takwa accepted the cookies, 1 for each hand. "Your aunt is very wise." "I know." Lily settled on the step between him and her mother, munching her own cookie with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Takwa, if you stay at the fort, will you teach me to track like you do? Mama says you can find people even when they don't want to be found. Tracking takes patience. You have to learn to see what most people miss." He ate his cookies slowly, buying time. "Why do you want to learn?" I do. Because if bad men come again, I want to be able to run where they can't follow." Her answer was matter-of-fact, the pragmatism of a child who'd learned that the world held real dangers. "And if Mama ever gets lost, I want to be able to find her." The simple statement hit harder than Takwa expected. This child, barely 6 years old, was already thinking about how to protect herself and her mother. Already learning that safety was something you earned through skill and knowledge, not something granted by hoping the world would be kind. "If I stay," he heard himself say the words before he'd consciously decided to speak them. "If I take the Major's offer, I'll teach you everything I know about tracking. But you have to promise to practice every day and never use the skills to be reckless." Lily's face lit up like the stars above. "You're staying? Really truly staying?" "I haven't decided for certain." But even as he said it, Takwa felt the decision crystallizing, felt the pull of connection, of purpose, of being part of something larger than his solitary wanderings. "I need to visit my people first, explain what's happened. But yes, I think I'll stay." Eliza's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. "Thank you for everything." They sat together on the step, 3 survivors watching stars wheel overhead while the fort settled into night around them. Inside, Sarah and William's laughter carried through the window, warm and alive. Tomorrow Takwa would ride north to his people, would explain his choice, would begin the process of becoming something he'd never been before. A man with roots, a man who chose to stay. But tonight, under the desert stars, with a woman who'd trusted him with her life and a child who believed he could teach her to be strong, Takwa felt the rightness of his decision settle, like stones building a foundation. His father had been wrong about one thing. Moving wasn't living. It was just postponing the moment when you had to choose what kind of man you wanted to be. Takwa had made his choice. Now he just had to learn how to live with it. The journey north to the Spokane encampment took Takwa 4 days of steady riding through country that grew greener as he left the Arizona Badlands behind. He crossed into New Mexico territory, then angled northwest into Colorado, following rivers and game trails that had carried his people's footsteps for generations. The land changed around him, red rock giving way to pine forests, desert heat softening into mountain coolness. His people had made summer camp near a bend in the Dolores River, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Takwa smelled the cook fires before he saw the lodges, smoke carrying the scent of roasting venison and wild onions. Children's laughter echoed through the trees, a sound that always meant home, regardless of how far he wandered. He was spotted before he reached the camp's edge. His cousin Thomas Running Deer came jogging through the trees, his face splitting into a wide grin. "Takwa, we thought you'd been eaten by a bear or stolen by a white woman." The greeting was delivered in their mother tongue, the familiar syllables settling over Takwa like a comfortable blanket. Neither, though the second came closer than you'd think. Takwa dismounted, clasping his cousin's forearm in the traditional greeting. "How are the people?" "It's healthy. The summer hunting has been good. Your aunt's been saving you the best cuts, convinced you'd come back starving." Thomas studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "You look different. Harder somehow. What happened out there?" "The story for the council fire." Takwa led his horse toward the camp, noting familiar faces emerging from lodges to greet him. Old Standing Bear, who taught him to make arrows when he was 6. Yellow Bird Woman, who'd nursed him through spotted fever when he was 12. The children who'd been infants when he left, now running and playing with the fearlessness of youth. That evening the council fire drew the whole camp, 37 people, the remnants of a band that had once numbered over 200 before disease and displacement had winnowed them down. Takwa sat in the place of honor beside the fire, facing the elders who'd guided the band since his grandfather's death. He told them everything, starting with the scream in the canyon and ending with Major Thornton's offer. When he finished, silence held the circle. Then Standing Bear spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 70 winters. "You saved a white woman and her child, killed 3 white men who would have murdered them. Now a white soldier chief offers you work." He puffed on his pipe, considering. "This is a path that leads away from the people. It's a path that leads toward something new." Takwa chose his words carefully, knowing this moment would define his future. "The old ways are dying, not because they're wrong, but because the world is changing too fast for them to survive unchanged. We can cling to what was and die with it, or we can adapt and find new ways to live." "And do you believe this soldier chief?" Standing Bear asked. "I believe he means what he says. Whether he can deliver on those intentions against the weight of his own people's prejudices, that I don't know." Takwa fed a stick to the fire, watching sparks spiral upward. "But I know that if I don't try, nothing changes. If no one bridges the gap between our peoples, the gap just grows wider until it becomes a chasm swallowing everything." Standing Bear was silent for a long time, his weathered face unreadable in the dancing firelight. Finally he spoke, his words measured and heavy with import. "When I was young, before the white soldiers came in such numbers, our people ranged across lands so vast you could ride for moons without seeing the same place twice." He paused, packing fresh tobacco into his pipe. "Now we follow the dictates of Indian agents and treaty lines drawn by men who've never seen the land they're dividing. The world has changed, and we have not changed enough to thrive in it." He lit his pipe from a burning stick, drew deeply, and exhaled smoke that hung in the still air. "Perhaps Takwa is right. Perhaps the only way forward is through people who can walk in both worlds without losing themselves. I give my blessing. Serve this soldier chief with honor. Learn what the white world can teach without forgetting what we have taught you." Relief and sorrow mixed in Takwa's chest. He'd been given permission to leave, but permission weighted with responsibility and expectation. He was being sent out not just to find his own path, but to forge one that others might follow. Morning came cold and clear. Takwa packed his few possessions, checked his horse's shoes and tack, and made his farewells. His aunt pressed dried meat and journey cakes into his hands, her eyes suspiciously bright. Thomas walked with him to the edge of camp, where the trail south disappeared into the trees. "Remember who you are." His cousin gripped his shoulder firmly. "Whatever name they call you, whatever uniform they want you to wear, remember you're Spokane. That's not something you can lose, unless you choose to give it away." The ride back to Fort Verde took 3 days of hard travel. Gagwan arrived late on the third evening to find the fort preparing for the transport to Prescott. Major Thornton found him in the stables. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind. I needed to settle things with my people." Takwa unsaddled his tired horse. "I'm here now. When do I start?" Officially, after we return from Prescott. You'll accompany us as far as the territorial capital. Observe how military operations work. Consider it orientation." The major's expression turned serious. "You made the right choice coming back." A soft knock at his door later that evening revealed Lily standing in the hallway, clutching her wooden doll. Behind her, looking apologetic, stood Eliza. "I'm sorry. She insisted on saying goodbye before you left tomorrow." Takwa knelt to Lily's level. "Hello, little one. Shouldn't you be asleep?" "I couldn't sleep knowing you were leaving." Her lower lip trembled. "Mama says you're coming back, but what if you don't? Then I'll make sure nothing bad happens." He took her small hand in his larger one. "I promised to teach you tracking, remember? I keep my promises, like you kept your promise to save us." "Exactly like that." He stood, looking at Eliza over Lily's head. "I'll be back in about 10 days. Then we start your lessons." Lily nodded solemnly, then surprised him by wrapping her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you for not leaving forever." After they left, Takwa finally slept, his dreams filled with images of canyons and rivers, lodges and forts, past and future tangling together. But when he woke at dawn, the uncertainty had solidified into something firmer. He'd made his choice. Now he would live with it. The transport column formed up as the sun broke over the eastern horizon. 20 soldiers, 3 wagons and 1 prisoner, shackled in the lead wagon under heavy guard. Hollis Crane sat with his head down, his defiance broken by the weight of evidence. Major Thornton gave the order to move out. As they rode through the desert morning, Takwa felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite peace, not quite certainty, but something close to both. He'd chosen to stay, to serve, to bridge the gap between worlds that seemed determined to remain separate. The desert stretched ahead, red and gold and infinite, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. Takwa rode into it with his eyes open and his purpose clear. He was Spokane. He was a scout. He was a man who'd saved 2 lives and found his own in the process. The story that had started with a desperate plea in a canyon was ending with a new beginning. Not a perfect ending, not a simple one, but an honest one. And on the frontier, where everything was uncertain and survival was never guaranteed, honest endings were the best anyone could hope for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.